Elias Vance had expected the capital of Caelora to look alien. He had not expected it to make Earth architecture feel apologetic. The royal city rose beneath a pale silver sky in layers of impossible geometry, towers curving upward like frozen ribbons, while transparent transit lanes carried silent vehicles between them. Entire gardens floated over the avenues, held aloft by gravity anchors that pulsed with soft white light. Somewhere far below, the oldest districts vanished beneath the modern city, sealed behind structures no living engineer fully understood. Elias watched all of it through the diplomatic shuttle window and tried to look impressed rather than terrified. "Beautiful place," he muttered. The shuttle's translation system replied, "Atmospheric visibility is within acceptable parameters." Elias stared at the speaker. "I wasn't talking to you." "Statement acknowledged." He sighed. "This is going to be a long assignment." His official reason for being on Caelora was simple enough: strengthen relations between humanity and the Aurelian crown. The unofficial reason was that 3 previous diplomats had managed to offend the royal court in ways ranging from accidentally refusing ceremonial food to comparing an important minister's formal headpiece to a satellite dish. Elias had been selected because, according to his supervisor, he possessed exceptional cultural sensitivity. Elias suspected that meant he was the only diplomat available. The palace stood at the center of the capital, built around a much older black structure whose surface absorbed scanner beams without reflection. Newer silver halls had been constructed around it over centuries, as though generations of architects had politely agreed not to ask what the ancient thing actually was. Queen Seralyne received him beneath a ceiling filled with drifting holographic constellations. She looked almost human at first glance. Tall, composed, with pale skin, dark ceremonial robes traced with thin metallic threads, and long pointed ears extending gracefully through her silver-black hair. Her eyes were unmistakably different, however, reflecting light with a faint golden shimmer that made Elias feel as though every careless thought might be visible. "Diplomat Vance," she said. "Your Majesty." He bowed exactly 27 degrees, as the cultural briefing had instructed. Seralyne studied him. Elias remained bent slightly forward. 1 second passed, then 2. He began wondering whether 27 degrees had been measured from the neck or the spine. Finally, she said, "You may stand normally." "Thank you." I was starting to lose circulation. For the briefest moment, something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. He decided not to celebrate. The first days passed in a blur of ceremonies, negotiation sessions, and meals where every utensil seemed designed to test humanity's evolutionary readiness for interstellar diplomacy. Elias learned quickly that Aurelian court etiquette had rules for where one stood, where one looked, how long one paused before answering, and which hand should touch a ceremonial cup. Naturally, nobody told him about the cup until after he touched it with the wrong hand. By the 5th afternoon, Elias escaped into the palace gardens under the respectable excuse of studying cultural horticulture. He was actually hiding from a trade minister. The garden stretched across several elevated terraces surrounded by shimmering force barriers. Trees with translucent leaves glowed faintly from within, while small winged creatures drifted between flowers like living fragments of stained glass. Elias had just found a bench when a voice behind him asked, "Are all humans this tired?" He turned. A young girl stood several steps away. She appeared perhaps 9 years old by human standards, dressed in a simple royal tunic rather than formal clothing. Her long ears immediately identified her as Aurelian, though her expression was far less guarded than anyone else Elias had met inside the palace. "You're Princess Lyra," he said. She narrowed her eyes. "You know me. Your face is on half the official banners." Lyra looked offended. "Only half?" Elias laughed before remembering that laughing at royalty might be another rule nobody had mentioned. The princess walked closer. "Mother says humans are difficult to understand. Your mother is probably correct. She says you use words that don't mean what they mean." Elias considered this. "That also sounds correct." Lyra sat beside him without permission from either palace protocol or physics. Earlier that morning, Elias had spent 20 minutes explaining to an Aurelian minister that the phrase, break a leg, was encouragement and not a traditional Earth threat. He decided honesty was safer. Human languages are messy. Lyra tilted her head. Why? Because humans are messy. Her translator processed this, hesitated, and announced, humans are physically contaminated. Lyra's eyes widened. Elias pointed accusingly at the device attached to his collar. That thing is trying to start a war. For the first time, Lyra laughed. It was bright, sudden, and completely inappropriate for the solemn atmosphere of the royal gardens. Elias found himself laughing too. After that, she began appearing almost every afternoon. Sometimes she asked about Earth. Sometimes she asked about human food. Once she spent 15 minutes trying to understand why humans kept animals inside their homes, and then became deeply concerned upon learning that cats frequently ignored their owners. Then why do you keep them? We've been asking that question for thousands of years. Their conversations became an unofficial routine. Elias noticed something strange during them. Palace servants always addressed Lyra as Your Highness. Guards stood straighter whenever she approached. Tutors spoke to her carefully, as though every sentence might become part of history. Nobody simply talked to her. Elias did. Perhaps that was why she returned. One afternoon, rain clouds gathered beyond the city's atmospheric shield, turning the distant horizon blue-gray. Elias found Lyra waiting beside the old observatory at the edge of the gardens. The building looked different from the rest of the palace. Its walls were dark stone rather than silver composite, and faint geometric markings crossed the entrance. Lyra pointed toward them. Nobody knows what those symbols mean. That's encouraging. Why? Because nothing improves confidence like discovering mysterious writing inside your own house. She smiled. Then her expression became unexpectedly serious. Teach me something. Elias raised an eyebrow. Your tutors teach you approximately everything. Everything, Aurelian. He leaned against the old doorway. What do you want to learn? Lyra thought carefully. Something human. He considered history, mathematics, Earth geography, or perhaps something culturally meaningful. Instead, he said, I could teach you English. What is English? A language from Earth. Is it difficult? Extremely. Lyra's eyes brightened. Elias immediately regretted that answer. He pointed toward himself. Elias. She repeated perfectly. Elias. He pointed toward her. Lyra. She smiled. That one seems easy. That was your name. Oh. He laughed. Then he taught her the first actual word. Hello. Lyra listened carefully. Hello. The pronunciation was almost perfect. Again. Hello. Elias nodded, impressed. Neither of them noticed the faint line of blue-white light appearing beneath the dust behind them. Deep inside the abandoned observatory, something that had been silent for thousands of years had heard the word too. The lessons continued the next afternoon, and then the afternoon after that, until Elias realized he had accidentally created the most unauthorized language program in the royal palace. Princess Lyra approached English with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered a secret door and had no intention of respecting the sign that said, "Do not enter." She learned words frighteningly fast. Colors took 10 minutes, numbers took less. By the end of the third lesson, she could count to 100, identify every object in the abandoned observatory, and insult the palace translation system with surprising accuracy. "It is stupid," she said proudly in English, pointing at the small device clipped to Elias's collar. "Excellent pronunciation," Elias replied. "Terrible diplomatic judgment." Lyra grinned. "Diplomatic judgment? No, don't memorize that one. Too late." The old observatory became their private classroom. It had not been used in decades, mostly because the newer palace towers possessed telescopes capable of examining planets hundreds of light-years away, while the ancient instrument beneath the cracked dome appeared to be pointed permanently toward empty space. Dust covered the black floor panels, and strange geometric markings ran along the walls, disappearing behind newer support structures. Elias assumed they were decorative remnants of some previous architectural era. Lyra assured him that palace historians had been arguing about them for 200 years, which Elias considered proof that historians across the galaxy were fundamentally the same species. He tried to teach her useful phrases. "Good morning." "Thank you." "How are you?" Lyra tolerated these patiently before asking, "What do humans say when someone says something ridiculous?" Elias hesitated. "Depends how ridiculous." "Very ridiculous." "Seriously?" She repeated it once. "Perfectly." "That's dangerous," Elias said. "Why?" "Because now you'll use it on your mother." "Seriously?" Elias stared at her. Lyra smiled with the satisfaction of a scientist confirming an experiment. He should have stopped there. Instead, he taught her, "No chance. You wish." And, through an unfortunate chain of events involving a broken snack dispenser, "That's not my problem." The last phrase became her favorite. Despite the humor, Elias began noticing how different Lyra became inside the observatory. In public, she stood straight, answered tutors formally, and watched every adult around her for approval. Here, she sat cross-legged on the floor and asked questions without fear of sounding foolish. She wanted to know why Earth had so many languages, why humans named spacecraft after dead explorers, whether rain smelled different on different planets, and why people invented jokes when facts were more efficient. Elias told her jokes existed because efficiency was overrated. She considered this deeply and concluded that humanity sounded exhausting. Queen Seralyne began noticing the change as well. Lyra arrived at breakfast humming strange human melodies. She once thanked a servant in English, then pretended nothing unusual had happened. Another morning, when a tutor informed her that royal protocol required 3 hours of genealogy study, Lyra whispered, "No chance." Seralyne heard it. She said nothing, but later asked her intelligence advisor what language her daughter had used. The advisor returned with no answer. Seralyne found that more interesting than alarming. The next afternoon, Elias brought a small projection slate loaded with images of Earth. Lyra stared at oceans, cities, forests, deserts, and orbital habitats with open fascination. "Your world has too much water," she said. "We like to keep options open." "For what?" "Flooding, apparently." She laughed, then pointed toward an image of London. Elias explained that the city had existed in various forms for thousands of years. Lyra asked him to say the names of old places slowly. He did. London, York, Thames, Dover. She copied each sound precisely. Then, almost as an afterthought, Elias recited an old phrase his grandfather used to say whenever a machine refused to cooperate. "Come on, wake up." Lyra repeated it. "Come on, wake up." Something clicked beneath the floor. Both of them stopped. Elias looked down. A thin line of pale light appeared between two black floor panels. Lyra whispered, "Did you do that?" "I was hoping you did." The line expanded, branching into angular patterns that matched the symbols on the walls. Dust lifted into the air as if disturbed by static charge. Somewhere beneath them, a deep mechanical vibration rolled through the observatory. Elias stepped backward. "That is definitely not part of the language lesson." Lyra naturally stepped closer. The old telescope above them rotated for the first time in perhaps centuries. Metal groaned. Hidden mechanisms awakened one after another. A ring of symbols ignited around the room, shining blue-white beneath layers of dust. Then everything stopped. Silence returned so suddenly it felt artificial. Lyra stared at Elias. Elias stared at the floor. Finally she said, in English, "Seriously." He slowly turned toward her. "You are never saying that word again." "That's not my problem." He closed his eyes. Somewhere below the capital, too deep for either of them to hear, another machine answered with a pulse of light. By the time the royal dinner began, Elias had managed to convince himself that the incident in the observatory had been an electrical malfunction. It was a weak theory. The palace engineering staff had inspected the room that morning and found no active power source connected to the old mechanisms, no functioning control system, and no explanation for why instruments that had been silent for centuries had moved at all. Elias had responded to this information by saying, "Excellent. So everything is normal." The chief engineer had not laughed. The banquet hall was brighter than usual that evening. Holographic constellations drifted beneath the ceiling, while transparent panels along the walls displayed the glowing towers of Caelora beyond the palace. Representatives from 6 neighboring systems sat around a long table of polished black crystal. Military commanders wore ceremonial armor instead of combat suits. Scientists argued quietly over translation frequencies, and royal advisors maintained expressions suggesting they had personally invented dignity. Elias sat 3 places away from Queen Seralyne and tried not to think about the observatory. Princess Lyra sat beside her mother. That concerned him far more. She had been unusually quiet since entering the hall. Elias knew that look. It was the look of a child who had acquired information adults did not know she possessed. He caught her eye. Lyra smiled. Elias immediately looked away. A trade ambassador from the Veyran Republic was speaking about mineral transport agreements when Lyra leaned slightly toward her mother. "May I say something?" Seralyne glanced down at her. During the ambassador's speech. Lyra considered this. "No." The ambassador continued. 30 seconds later, Lyra whispered, "Now." Seralyne's long ears shifted almost imperceptibly, which Elias had learned was the Aurelian equivalent of losing patience. "Not yet." Lyra nodded solemnly. Elias silently mouthed, "Don't." She pretended not to see him. The ambassador finally finished. Everyone politely touched 2 fingers to the table, the local gesture of appreciation. Before Seralyne could introduce the next speaker, Lyra stood. The entire hall quieted. Elias slowly placed his cup down. He already knew disaster was approaching. He simply did not know its speed. Lyra looked directly at him. Then, in flawless English, she said, "Good evening, everyone. My name is Lyra, and Elias has been teaching me a human language." Silence. Absolute, beautiful, terrible silence. Several alien delegates activated their translators at once. The devices failed to identify the language. Seralyne turned toward Elias. Slowly, very slowly. Elias smiled weakly. "Surprise?" The Queen's expression did not change. Lyra continued, delighted by the attention. "My mother did not know because this was secret." Elias covered his face with one hand. A military commander leaned toward another and whispered, "Is the human conducting covert education?" Elias heard him. "No," he said. "That sounds much worse than what happened." Seralyne finally spoke. "Elias." There were entire diplomatic crises hidden inside the way she said his name. "Yes, Your Majesty. You taught my daughter an Earth language without informing me. When you phrase it that way, it sounds irresponsible. How else should I phrase it?" He considered this. "Cultural enrichment?" Lyra interrupted in English. "Mom, relax. I've got this." Elias froze. Seralyne blinked. The Queen looked at her daughter, then at Elias, then back at her daughter. For 3 long seconds, Elias wondered whether he was about to become the first human diplomat executed for grammar. Seralyne's lips twitched. She tried to suppress it, failed. A soft laugh escaped her. The entire table stared. The Queen laughed harder. Lyra beamed proudly. Elias leaned back in his chair. "I would like the official record to state that I survived." Even several advisors smiled. The tension broke. Then one man near the far end of the table dropped his data tablet. The sound cracked through the hall. Dr. Vallis, senior historian of the Royal Archives, had gone pale. His eyes were fixed on Lyra. "Say it again," he said. Seralyne's laughter stopped. Lyra frowned. "Say what?" "The last sentence." Lyra looked at Elias. He nodded. "Mom, relax. I've got this." Vallis stood so quickly his chair slid backward. "That pattern." What pattern? Seralyne asked. The consonant sequence. The rhythm. He activated his wrist projector. A column of ancient symbols appeared above the table. Elias recognized them instantly. They were the same shapes carved into the abandoned observatory. Valus enlarged one section. This inscription was recovered from beneath the palace foundation 183 years ago. We have never been able to pronounce it. Elias stared at the symbols. Valus touched one. A synthesized reconstruction produced a broken sound. It was distorted, incomplete, but familiar. Too familiar. Lyra whispered, "That sounds like English." Nobody laughed this time. Valus turned toward Elias. "Speak." "Speak what?" "Anything." Elias hesitated. Then he said, "Hello." A faint chime echoed from somewhere beneath the banquet hall. Every holographic constellation above them flickered. The lights dimmed. Seralyne stood. Guards reached for their weapons. A line of blue-white symbols appeared across the black crystal table. The same symbols. The same light. Elias stared at them as his stomach tightened. Lyra leaned toward him and whispered in English, "Seriously?" For once, Elias had no joke ready. The passage beneath the banquet hall had not appeared on any modern palace blueprint. Valus discovered it only after the glowing symbols spread across the crystal table and formed a descending sequence of geometric marks that matched an abandoned section of the royal archive. 2 hours later, Elias found himself following Queen Seralyne through a corridor that had probably been sealed before humanity invented writing. The walls were made of the same black material as the oldest sections of the palace, smooth enough to reflect no light and cold enough to make his breath visible. Lyra walked between them with the excitement of someone being allowed into a forbidden museum after bedtime. "You should be upstairs," Seralyne said for the third time. "You said that already. And yet you are still here. So repeating it does not work." Elias looked at the queen. "She has a point." Seralyne gave him a look sharp enough to cut armor. "I deeply regret allowing you to influence her. That makes two of us." Valus led them toward a circular doorway covered in ancient symbols. Royal engineers had installed modern scanners around it decades earlier, but none had ever detected a mechanism, power source, or seam. Elias stepped closer. "This is the same script as the observatory." Valus nodded. "And as the table." Lyra examined the markings. "Can I say something?" Seralyne immediately answered, "No." "You don't even know what I was going to say." "That is why I said no." Elias almost laughed, but one of the symbols began glowing beneath Lyra's hand. Everyone froze. She pulled back. The glow vanished. Valus stared at the doorway. Again. Seralyne hesitated, then nodded. Lyra touched the symbol. Nothing happened. Elias frowned. "Try speaking." "What?" "Anything in English." Lyra thought for a moment. "Hello." The entire doorway illuminated. A deep vibration rolled through the floor. Seralyne stepped forward instinctively, placing herself between Lyra and the door. Elias heard mechanisms moving somewhere inside the wall. Not gears, something smoother, magnetic locks perhaps, or a technology that only sounded mechanical because his brain needed a familiar comparison. Then the doorway separated into 6 triangular sections and folded silently into the walls. Beyond it lay darkness. A row of lights awakened one after another, stretching into a vast chamber. Elias whispered, "Well, that seems safe." Seralyne looked at him. "You say that whenever something is clearly unsafe." "It saves time." They entered. The chamber was enormous, extending far beyond the palace foundation. Platforms floated without visible support. Ancient machines hung in vertical rows from the walls, each shaped like interlocking rings surrounding dark crystal cores. A transparent bridge crossed an open shaft that disappeared into blue-white mist below. Valus stopped breathing for a second. "We believed this level was empty." Elias looked around. "You were spectacularly wrong." At the center of the chamber stood a console shaped like a narrow pedestal. Symbols floated above it. Lyra stepped closer. One symbol changed, then another. They rearranged themselves. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "They're responding to us." "No," Valus said quietly. "They're responding to language." He activated a translation slate and compared the symbols with thousands of archival records. Several phonetic patterns appeared. Elias leaned over his shoulder. "That one looks familiar." Valus enlarged it. A reconstructed pronunciation played. Broken, harsh, ancient, but Elias recognized part of it. 1. Seralyne turned to him. "You are certain?" "No, which is usually when people trust me most." He stepped toward the console. 1. A ring above them rotated. 2. Another ring moved. 3. The entire chamber awakened. Light raced across the walls. Lyra gasped. A holographic map erupted into the air, filling the chamber with thousands of stars. Caelora appeared at the center. Then more points activated. Hundreds. Thousands. Each connected by faint lines stretching across the galaxy. Seralyne stared upward. "What is this?" Valus answered slowly. "A network." Elias watched distant systems illuminate. "Of what?" The floor beneath them trembled. A voice emerged from the console. Not synthesized, not mechanical. It sounded almost human. The words were incomprehensible, but one fragment cut through clearly. "Return!" Lyra grabbed Elias's hand. Seralyne stepped closer to her daughter. Valus looked as though every theory he had ever published had just caught fire. Then the map shifted. One point appeared far from Caelora, a small yellow star. Elias stared at it. His pulse quickened. He knew that system. Everyone did. Earth. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Lyra whispered, "That is your home." Elias nodded. "Yes." Another line appeared. It connected Earth directly to Caelora. The ancient machine spoke again. This time, the final word was unmistakable. "Descendants." Elias looked at Seralyne. She was already looking at him. For once, neither of them had anything amusing to say. By morning, the secret beneath the palace was no longer entirely secret. Too many systems had awakened at once. Energy readings had surged across the capital. Maintenance networks had rebooted without authorization, and 3 separate observatories had detected pulses traveling through the planet's crust in patterns no modern Aurelian machine could produce. The Royal Council demanded answers before breakfast. Elias, who had slept for perhaps 40 minutes, decided that interstellar archaeology was significantly less romantic when conducted under fluorescent emergency lights. The council chamber was crowded with generals, ministers, engineers, and scientists, each speaking as though volume might compensate for uncertainty. Queen Seralyne sat at the center with Lyra beside her, and Valus standing near the holographic display. Elias leaned against a console and tried to remain awake. General Tavrin, commander of the planetary defense fleet, pointed toward the ancient network map. "If this system connects thousands of worlds, then it may also control transit routes, weapons platforms, or defensive installations." Valus frowned. "We do not know that, which is why we must secure it immediately." Elias opened one eye. "You mean poke the ancient machine until it tells us whether it has guns?" Tavrin glared at him. "I mean, establish control." That sounded better, yes. Seralyne raised a hand, silencing the room. "No one will attempt forced access." Several ministers protested at once. She ignored them. "The system recognized Elias and Lyra through language. We will proceed carefully." Tavrin folded his arms. "With respect, Majesty, we cannot place the security of Caelora in the hands of a foreign diplomat and a child." Lyra looked offended. "I know more English than you." Elias coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. Tavrin did not appreciate either reaction. Seralyne's expression hardened. "My daughter has already contributed more than most of this council." Silence followed. Elias decided he liked the Queen more every day. Their research moved into the newly opened underground chamber. Engineers established a temporary laboratory around the ancient console, while Valus compared Aurelian inscriptions with human phonetics. The similarities were incomplete, but undeniable. Certain sounds triggered specific symbols. Others opened data layers or activated machinery. Unfortunately, the machine appeared to possess opinions about Elias. A small floating device emerged from a wall during one experiment and began following him. It was spherical, silver-black, and equipped with 3 delicate mechanical arms. "What does it do?" Elias asked. Valus scanned it. "I believe it is a maintenance unit." The machine extended one arm and brushed dust from Elias's shoulder. Lyra laughed. "I think it likes you. It thinks I'm dirty." The machine sprayed a fine mist over his jacket. Elias stared at it. "I'm being judged by prehistoric housekeeping technology." The machine followed him for the rest of the afternoon. Even Seralyne laughed when it attempted to polish his boots during a linguistic test. The humor faded when the central system opened another archive. A wall of symbols appeared, followed by a 3-dimensional representation of Caelora. Lines of light spread beneath the capital, then outward beneath oceans, mountains, and entire continents. Valus whispered, "The network is planetary." Elias stepped closer. "What are those structures?" Dozens of enormous nodes appeared underground, one beneath the palace, others beneath cities, more beneath uninhabited regions. Then a second layer activated. Thousands of stars appeared around Caelora. "This isn't a local installation," Elias said. Valus shook his head. "It is a communication hub." General Tavrin, who had insisted on attending, stared at the map. "Communication with whom?" Before Valus could answer, the chamber darkened. Every modern light failed. Emergency systems attempted to activate and immediately shut down again. Seralyne reached for Lyra. Elias heard the ancient maintenance sphere retreat into the wall. Then the console spoke. The voice was clearer than before, still fragmented, still ancient, but understandable in pieces. "Unauthorized. Population. Control protocol." Valus went pale. "What did it say?" Elias stared at the symbols appearing across the chamber. "I think we have a bigger problem." The floor vibrated. Far above them, the capital's transit lanes stopped. Power vanished from several districts. Defense satellites rotated away from military command. Seralyne activated her wrist communicator. Nothing. Tavrin cursed. The ancient voice continued. "Identity. Unverified. Surface access. Restricted." A holographic image of the city appeared. Red zones expanded across it. Lyra stepped closer to Elias. "Is it angry?" "I don't know. That is not comforting. I'm a diplomat, not a comfort machine." She looked at him. "Seriously?" He sighed. "Yes, seriously." Valus studied the interface. "It may believe we are intruders." Seralyne's eyes narrowed. "On our own world. The system predates our civilization." Another section of the map turned red. Elias felt his stomach tighten. What happens when the entire city becomes restricted? No one answered. Then the machine answered for them. Containment sequence initiated. Deep beneath Caelora, ancient mechanisms began moving. The sound was distant at first, then louder. Thousands of systems waking at once. Elias stared at the glowing symbols. Yesterday, he had been teaching a Princess English. Today, that language might be the only thing standing between the capital and a machine old enough to consider their entire civilization unauthorized. The first evacuation sirens reached the underground chamber as a faint vibration through the walls. By the time Elias, Seralyne, Lyra, and Valus returned to the upper levels, the palace had transformed from a place of ceremony into a command center. Holographic maps filled the corridors, guards moved civilians toward shielded transit platforms, and emergency drones projected red arrows across the floor. Outside the high windows, parts of the capital had gone dark while others flickered beneath unstable power fields. Several floating districts had descended automatically into safety positions, but no one had ordered them to move. The ancient system is overriding modern infrastructure, Valus said. Elias looked toward a tower in the distance as its lights vanished floor by floor. That sounds like the polite version. Seralyne was already issuing orders. Move medical facilities onto independent reactors, disconnect military networks from planetary control, evacuate the lower transit sectors first. An advisor approached her. Majesty, the Council recommends immediate departure from the capital. No. Your safety. My citizens are still here. The advisor stopped arguing. Elias watched her for a moment. Until now, he had seen Seralyne mainly as a queen, hidden behind ceremony and discipline. Now the ceremony was gone. She moved quickly, listened faster than anyone around her, and made decisions without hesitation. Lyra stood beside him, unusually quiet. You are worried about her, Elias said. She is worried about everyone. That is usually the problem with good rulers. Lyra glanced up. Do humans have good rulers? Elias considered the question. Occasionally, we try not to frighten them away. A pulse shook the palace. Lights flashed. Valus ran toward them carrying a projection slate. I found something. The ancient system had opened a new linguistic layer during the power surge. Thousands of symbols had been paired with sound patterns, but most were corrupted. Valus projected them into the air. We cannot translate full sentences, but commands appear to depend on pronunciation, cadence, and sequence. Elias frowned. Meaning? Meaning saying the correct word incorrectly may produce the wrong command. Lyra looked alarmed. That seems like bad design. Elias pointed at her. Finally, someone understands human technology. Valus ignored them. The central intelligence is beneath the oldest structure. If we can reach it, we may be able to identify ourselves. Seralyne turned. We? Valus hesitated. Elias knew what was coming before the historian said it. Lyra. Seralyne's expression changed immediately. No. Majesty. No. Lyra stepped forward. Mother. Seralyne turned sharply. No. You said it twice. And I will continue until it becomes effective. Elias almost smiled, but stopped when he saw the fear behind Seralyne's anger. The queen looked at him. You understand why she cannot go. I understand why you do not want her to. That is not the same answer. No. The room grew quiet. Elias looked toward Lyra. She remembers sound patterns better than any of us. The system responds to her voice. We may need that. Seralyne's jaw tightened. She is 9. I know. You are asking me to take my daughter into an unknown machine while the city is collapsing. I'm asking you to let us stop it from collapsing. Lyra reached for her mother's hand. Seralyne looked down at her. I am not losing you to this. Lyra swallowed. Then softly in English she said, Mom, relax. I've got this. For a second no one moved. Seralyne closed her eyes. Then she laughed once, quietly, despite herself. That phrase is becoming intolerable. Elias nodded. I regret everything. They descended 20 minutes later. The path to the planetary core had opened beneath the ancient chamber. A gravity shaft carried them downward through kilometers of darkness, while rings of blue-white machinery rotated around them. No modern scanner could determine how far the structure extended. At intervals, enormous conduits disappeared into the planet's crust, carrying energy toward distant nodes across Caelora. At the bottom, waited a chamber shaped like a sphere. A platform floated at its center. The moment Lyra stepped onto it, symbols appeared around her. The voice returned. Identity. Required. Valus whispered. Carefully. Elias stepped beside Lyra. He pronounced the phonetic sequence they had reconstructed. Human. Earth. The chamber brightened. Lyra followed with the Aurelian designation for Caelora. The system paused. Lineage. Fragmented. Another set of symbols appeared. Elias recognized one sound. Descendants. Valus stared. It is asking whether we are descendants. Of whom? Seralyne asked. The system answered before anyone else could. Stars filled the chamber. Earth. Caelora. Then hundreds of other inhabited worlds. A figure appeared among them. Not human. Not Aurelian. Tall. Indistinct. Surrounded by branching patterns of light. Origin civilization, the machine said. The words were broken, but clear enough. Migration. Collapse. Memory lost. Lyra whispered. It knows us. No, Elias said. He looked at the map. I think it knows what came before us. The red containment indicators began flashing faster. Valus shouted, We have seconds. Elias looked at Lyra. The phrase. She nodded. Together they spoke the reconstructed command. Recognize living descendants. End containment. Nothing happened. Then the entire chamber went dark. Seralyne pulled Lyra close. Elias held his breath. A single light appeared beneath their feet. The ancient voice returned. Recognition. Accepted. Above them, across the capital, power began returning. One district, then another. Transit lanes restarted. Defense satellites rotated back toward their assigned positions. The red zones disappeared. Lyra looked at Elias and smiled. Seriously? He exhaled. Yes. Then the machine spoke one final sentence. Archive access granted. Behind them, a doorway opened into a chamber filled with more stars than Elias had ever seen. For 3 days after the containment sequence ended, nobody in the palace slept properly. Engineers crawled through newly opened corridors beneath the capital. Historians argued over data that could overturn half the accepted history of the galaxy, and the Royal Council discovered that ancient technology was considerably less impressive when it refused to answer anyone who shouted at it. Elias found that last part satisfying. The archive beneath Caelora proved larger than anyone had imagined. It contained star charts older than modern civilizations, records of vanished migration routes, descriptions of artificial worlds, and scientific principles that made current Aurelian propulsion systems look primitive. Yet the most important discovery was not a weapon or a machine. It was history. Humanity and the Aurelians had not descended directly from the same species, but both civilizations had inherited fragments of culture from refugees belonging to the ancient network builders. Thousands of years of separation had transformed languages almost beyond recognition. Almost. Fragments survived. Sounds. Rhythms. Words buried inside other words. English had preserved enough accidental echoes to awaken systems that no Aurelian scholar had been able to reach. Valus stood inside the archive for nearly 12 hours the first day. When Elias finally found him, the historian was surrounded by floating symbols. You need food. I have just discovered evidence of a civilization spanning 12,000 inhabited systems. You still need food. Valus looked offended. Elias handed him a nutrition bar. History can wait 5 minutes. It has waited approximately 32,000 years. Then 5 more won't hurt. Even Valus laughed. General Tavrin was less amused. He demanded military access to the archive until Seralyne formally restricted every ancient system to a joint scientific commission. The decision angered several council members, but the Queen did not bend. We nearly lost the capital because we touched technology we did not understand, she told them. Our first responsibility is comprehension, not possession. Elias watched from the edge of the chamber and realized that weeks earlier he would have remained silent. Diplomats were supposed to observe, advise, compromise. Now he stepped forward. and Earth will follow the same restrictions. Several heads turned toward him. Seralyne raised an eyebrow. You are volunteering your government? I am volunteering myself to have a very unpleasant conversation with them. That sounds dangerous. It is diplomacy. Lyra whispered loudly. Same thing. That became the beginning of the Caeloran Archive Accord. Earth and the Aurelian Crown established a joint research initiative under royal protection. Valus became its scientific director. Elias was appointed diplomatic coordinator, a position he accepted only after confirming that it did not require ceremonial robes. It did. He complained anyway. The old observatory was restored, though Elias insisted that one dusty bench remain exactly where it had been. That was where Lyra's lessons continued. Except they were no longer secret. Within a month, half the palace children were learning English. This created problems nobody had predicted. Elias discovered one morning that 3 junior attendants had started greeting royal advisors with, "Seriously." He found Lyra suspiciously innocent. You taught them. I taught them language. You taught them chaos. That is also human culture. He stared at her. She smiled. He had no defense. Seralyne began attending the lessons occasionally. At first, she claimed she was there only to observe. Then Elias caught her repeating vocabulary under her breath. Her pronunciation was excellent, though she refused to admit she was practicing. Their relationship changed quietly rather than dramatically. The distance between queen and diplomat softened. Conversations no longer ended when official business did. Sometimes they walked through the restored gardens after meetings and spoke about Earth, Caelora, Lyra, or nothing important at all. Elias learned that Seralyne loved ancient music and hated ceremonial dinners. Seralyne learned that Elias told jokes whenever he was afraid. You joke often, she once said. That is confidential diplomatic information. She smiled. Months later, another royal dinner was held in the same hall where Lyra had first spoken English. This time there were no frightened guards, no ancient alarms, and no glowing symbols spreading across the table. Only laughter. Valus talked excitedly about a newly translated archive section. Tavern complained that the ancient maintenance sphere still followed Elias whenever he entered the lower chambers. The little machine floated beside Elias's chair and polished his sleeve. I have accepted my fate, he said. Lyra laughed. Then Seralyne stood. The room quieted. She looked directly at Elias. In careful English, she said, You taught my daughter a human language without permission. Elias slowly lowered his cup. This feels familiar. You awakened ancient machines. Technically, Lyra did. You changed our understanding of history. That one I will accept partial responsibility for. Seralyne's expression softened. And you gave my daughter something no tutor had managed to give her. Elias glanced at Lyra. What? A place where she could simply be herself. For once, he had no joke ready. Lyra smiled at him. Seralyne continued in English. Thank you, Elias. He nodded. You're welcome. The queen sat. Then, with perfect timing, she added, But your teaching methods are terrible. Elias blinked. Lyra burst into laughter. Seralyne's long ears tilted slightly as she smiled. Elias pointed at the princess. You taught her that. Lyra raised both hands. That's not my problem. The entire table laughed. Elias leaned back in his chair, defeated. Far beneath the palace, inside the ancient network, a dormant symbol flickered. A soft mechanical voice repeated the phrase. That's not my problem. Valus slowly looked toward the floor. Elias closed his eyes. Seralyne laughed harder, and for the first time since arriving on Caelora, Elias did not feel like a visitor standing inside someone else's world. He felt at home.